The Georgia sun was a heavy, golden weight in the summer of 1853. In the city of Savannah, the houses were tall and grand, with sweeping staircases and gardens that smelled of jasmine and honey. But beneath the beauty, the ground was made of red clay that stained everything it touched. Adeline Sterling lived in one of those grand houses. She was 21 years old, with hair the color of polished mahogany and a mind that moved faster than a river after a storm. Her father, Judge Thaddeus Sterling, was a man who believed that everything in the world had a place. To him, life was like a courtroom. There were rules, there were punishments, and there was order. Adeline did not fit into his order. While other girls her age were practicing their embroidery and dreaming of finding a husband, Adeline was in the library. She read books about philosophy, about far-off lands, and about freedom. She had no interest in the young men who came to call, with their shiny boots and their hollow compliments. Her heart belonged to the quiet moments she shared with her best friend Sarah as they walked through the shaded woods beyond the plantation. "You're far too quiet today, Adeline," Sarah said one afternoon as they sat by a small creek. "I feel like I'm waiting for something to break," Adeline whispered. She didn't know then that the break was already happening. A whisper had started in the village, a cruel, sharp-edged rumor that Adeline Sterling did not love men. In 1853, that whisper was a weapon. The rumor grew like a weed in the dark. It started at a garden party hidden behind the flutter of silk fans. A young man, angry that Adeline had refused to dance with him, told his sister that Adeline was unnatural. The word lesbian was not a word people said out loud in polite society, but they meant it with every side eye and every cold shoulder. By the end of the week, the rumor had reached the ears of Judge Sterling. Adeline was sitting in the parlor when her father entered. He didn't look like her father. He looked like a judge delivering a death sentence. His face was a mask of cold fury. "Is it true?" he asked. His voice was like the sound of a shovel hitting a stone. "Is what true, Papa?" Adeline asked, her heart beginning to race. "The talk, the whispers that you have no heart for a husband because you give it to others of your own kind." Adeline felt the world tilt. She didn't lie. She couldn't. "I only want to be free to choose who I care for, Papa. I don't want the life you've picked for me." Thaddeus Sterling didn't scream. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply turned around and walked out of the room. But Adeline saw his hands. They were shaking with a rage so deep it felt like the earth was trembling. That night, the judge sat in his study for hours. He didn't think about his daughter's happiness. He thought about his reputation. He thought about how the other judges would look at him. To him, Adeline was a case that needed to be solved. He believed in correction. He believed that if a person was broken, you had to apply pressure until the pieces clicked back together. He decided on a plan so cruel that it would be spoken about in whispers for 100 years. He sent for Overseer Grimes, a man with a face like a scarred boot and a heart to match. "I need the biggest man in the quarters," the judge said. "I need Silas." Silas was a man of legendary strength. He was a giant, standing a head taller than any other man on the plantation. He was a man who had been bought and sold like a piece of equipment, used to break horses because he was the only one strong enough to hold them. "I am giving my daughter to him," the judge whispered. "I want her to learn what it means to be a woman in the shadow of a man. I want her affliction crushed by reality." The rain began to fall as a soft mist, but by midnight it was a torrential downpour that turned the red clay into a swamp. Adeline was woken up by the sound of her door being kicked open. Grimes and two other men stood there. They didn't say a word. They grabbed her by the arms and dragged her down the stairs. Her father stood at the bottom, holding a single candle. The light cast long, flickering shadows on the walls. "You have shamed me for the last time," Thaddeus said. "From this moment on, you are no longer a Sterling. You are a lesson." They dragged her out into the rain. Adeline screamed for Sarah, for mercy, for anyone, but the thunder drowned her out. They walked for miles into the deepest part of the pine woods, where the trees grew so close together they blocked out the sky. There, in a small, rotting cabin, waited Silas. He stood in the corner, his massive frame nearly touching the ceiling. He looked like a statue carved from shadow. "He's all yours now, Silas," Grimes laughed, shoving Adeline into the room and locking the heavy iron bolt from the outside. Adeline hit the floor hard. The smell of damp wood and old smoke filled her nose. She scrambled into the farthest corner, her hand reaching into the hidden pocket of her dress. She pulled out a small, sharp knife she used for her sewing. "Stay back," she gasped, her voice cracking. "If you touch me, I'll kill you. I swear it." Silas didn't move. He didn't even look at her. He sat down on the dirt floor on the opposite side of the room. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and the heavy, rhythmic sound of his breathing. Hours passed. The candle burned down to a stub and went out, leaving them in total darkness. Adeline didn't sleep. She watched the silhouette of the giant man. She expected him to lung at her, to be the monster her father wanted him to be. "I don't want to be here either, miss," a voice finally rumbled. It was deep, like the low notes of a pipe organ. Adeline froze. "What?" "The judge. He told me if I don't break you, he'll sell my brother down the river. I'm a prisoner, just like you." As the sun began to peek through the cracks in the cabin walls, the tension began to shift. It didn't disappear, but it changed from fear into something else, a shared understanding. Silas told Adeline about his life. He told her about being taken from his mother when he was just a boy. He told her how he had to act like a beast just to survive, even though he loved to carve small birds out of wood and watch the stars. Adeline told Silas about her books. She told him about Sarah. She told him that she would rather die than be the person her father wanted her to be. "They're going to come every day to check on us," Silas said. "If they see you're not crying, if they see I'm not doing what they want, they'll hurt us both." "Then we have to act," Adeline said. They created a play. When the overseers came by to peek through the windows, Silas would shout and slam his fist against the wall. Adeline would sob and huddle in the corner. They made the judge believe his plan was working, but in the quiet hours of the night, they were planning something else entirely. They were planning an escape. Overseer Grimes was not easily fooled. He had been a hunter of people for a long time. He noticed that while Adeline looked tired, her eyes didn't look defeated. They looked like flint, ready to spark. He began to linger by the cabin long after the sun went down. He watched the way Silas moved. He noticed that Silas wasn't eating much, giving his small rations of cornmeal and salt pork to Adeline when the guards weren't looking. "Something's wrong," Grimes told the judge one morning. "The girl isn't breaking. She's hardening." Thaddeus Sterling's face twisted. "Then we make it harder. If Silas won't break her spirit, then we will break his body in front of her. We'll see how long she stays unnatural when she sees the cost of her stubbornness." He ordered the correction post to be set up in the clearing in front of the cabin. The next morning, the door to the cabin was thrown open. Grimes and 4 men entered. They didn't go for Adeline, they went for Silas. Even with his great strength, Silas couldn't fight off 5 armed men. They dragged him to the post and chained his wrists high above his head. Adeline was forced to stand just a few feet away, held in place by Grimes. "This is on you, Adeline," her father said, riding up on his white horse. "Every lash he takes is because of your sin. If you want him to stop, you only have to say the word. You only have to promise to be the daughter I demand." The whip cracked. Silas didn't scream. He gritted his teeth, his muscles bulging as he took the pain. Adeline felt every strike in her own soul. She looked at her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, and saw only a monster. "Stop it!" she screamed. "Stop! I'll do whatever you want." The judge raised his hand. The whipping stopped. "Good. Tonight, you return to the house. The lesson is over." But Adeline wasn't giving in. She was buying time. Adeline was taken back to the grand house, but she was a different person now. She moved like a ghost through the hallways. She was quiet, she was obedient, and she even agreed to meet a new suitor. Her father was delighted. He thought he had won. He started planning a re-entry ball to show off his cured daughter. But while the judge was busy sending out invitations, Adeline was busy in the middle of the night. She knew where her father kept his keys. She knew where the gold was hidden in the floorboards of his study. And most importantly, she found a way to send a message to Sarah. She needed Sarah to bring a wagon to the edge of the swamp. She needed Silas to be ready. "I'm going to take everything from him," Adeline whispered to herself as she looked in the mirror. She wasn't wearing a dress for a ball. She was wearing the clothes of a rebel. The night of the ball arrived. The house was filled with music and the smell of expensive tobacco. Everyone was talking about the miracle of Judge Sterling's daughter. Adeline waited until the music was at its loudest. She slipped out of the ballroom and into her father's study. Her hands didn't shake this time. She took the heavy leather pouch of gold. She took the papers that proved Silas was a free man, papers she had forged herself using her father's own stamps. She then went to the tobacco barn. Using a lantern, she set fire to the dry leaves. Within minutes, the sky turned a terrifying, brilliant orange. "Fire!" someone screamed. In the chaos, Adeline ran. She didn't head for the road, she headed for the woods. She reached the cabin where Silas was waiting. He had used his strength to pull the iron bolt right out of the rotting wood of the doorframe. They didn't have much time. The judge's hounds were the best in the state, and Grimes would be hot on their trail. "We have to go through the swamp," Silas said. "The water will hide our scent." The Ogeechee Swamp was a place of legends. It was a labyrinth of cypress knees and black water, filled with alligators and snakes. Most people feared it, but for Silas it was a map he had memorized in his dreams. They waded through water that came up to their waists. Adeline felt the slime and the mud, but she didn't care. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was breathing real air. "Listen," Silas whispered, stopping dead in his tracks. In the distance, they heard the baying of the hounds. The judge was coming. They reached a small island in the center of the swamp just as the sun began to rise. But they weren't alone. Grimes had found a shortcut. He stood there with his rifle, his eyes gleaming with a sick joy. "The judge wants the girl back," Grimes said, "but he said I don't have to bring the giant back in one piece." He leveled the rifle at Silas. Adeline didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She threw the heavy pouch of gold coins at Grimes' head. The weight of it knocked his aim off just as he pulled the trigger. The bullet whistled past Silas's ear. Before Grimes could reload, Silas was on him. It wasn't a fight, it was justice. Silas didn't kill him, but he took the rifle and threw it into the deep mud. He tied Grimes to a cypress tree with his own belt. "Tell the judge," Adeline said, standing over the overseer, "that Adeline Sterling died in the fire. Tell him his reputation is all he has left." They met Sarah at the edge of the swamp. She had the wagon ready, covered in hay and old blankets. The journey north took weeks. They moved by night, following the Underground Railroad through the Carolinas and into Virginia. They saw things that changed them forever. Other people seeking freedom, people who risked everything just for a chance to own their own names. Silas and Adeline became a team. He provided the strength, she provided the strategy. They were no longer master and slave, or man and woman. They were two souls who had been forged in the same fire. When they finally crossed the line into Pennsylvania, the air felt different. It felt lighter. The year was 1858, 5 years after the fire that had turned the Sterling Manor into a blackened skeleton. In the north, the air was crisp, smelling of pine and the coming winter snow. Adeline, now known as Ada, had found a peace she never thought possible. She and Sarah shared a life of quiet dignity, and Silas had become the backbone of their small community. But in Georgia, the fire in Thaddeus Sterling's heart had never gone out. It had only curdled into a cold, obsessive poison. He had lost his money, his status, and his power, but he had kept one thing: his hatred. He had spent 5 years and the last of his family's gold hiring slave catchers and private detectives. Finally, a letter arrived. A man matching Silas's legendary description had been spotted in a small Pennsylvania village, living near a school teacher with mahogany hair. Thaddeus didn't call the law. He didn't trust the law anymore. He packed a pair of dueling pistols, hired 2 desperate men from the Savannah docks, and headed north. It was a Tuesday evening, the sky the color of a bruised plum. Adeline was walking home from the schoolhouse, her breath blooming in the cold air. She felt a prickle on the back of her neck, the same feeling she used to get when Overseer Grimes watched her from the shadows. She stopped. The woods were too silent. Suddenly, a voice rang out, cracked and thin, like dry parchment. "You always were a stubborn case, Adeline." Out of the trees stepped a man she barely recognized. Thaddeus Sterling was thin, his clothes threadbare, his eyes sunken and bright with madness. He held a pistol leveled at her heart. Behind him stood 2 men with heavy clubs and cruel smiles. "Papa?" Adeline whispered, the old fear trying to claw its way back up her throat. I have come to finish the judgment, Thaddeus said. I would rather see you in the ground than living this lie. You will come back to Georgia to face your shame, or you will die here in the mud. She isn't going anywhere with you. The ground seemed to vibrate as Silas stepped out from behind the schoolhouse. He was no longer the hunched, quiet man of the plantation. He stood tall, wearing a leather blacksmith's apron, his arms thick with the muscle of a man who worked for himself. In his hand, he carried a heavy iron sledgehammer. The two hired men stepped back. They hadn't been told they were fighting a giant. Stand aside, boy, Thaddeus screamed, his hands shaking on the trigger. This is a matter of family honor. You lost your honor the night you sold her, Silas rumbled. He stepped in front of Adeline, shielding her with his massive frame. You have no power here. There are no judges here, but the truth. I am the law, Thaddeus shrieked, and he pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the valley, startling the crows into the sky. But Thaddeus's hand had been shaking too hard. The bullet hissed past Silas's shoulder and thudded into a tree. Before Thaddeus could cock the second pistol, Silas moved with the speed of a falling mountain. He didn't use the hammer. He simply stepped forward and gripped the barrels of the judge's guns, twisting them upward toward the sky. The two hired men looked at Silas, then at the iron-willed look in Adeline's eyes and realized this was a fight they couldn't win. They turned and ran into the darkness, leaving the judge alone. Silas looked down at the small broken man. He didn't strike him. He simply took the pistols, snapped the wooden handles with his bare hands and dropped the pieces in the dirt. Go home, Thaddeus, Adeline said, stepping out from behind Silas. Her voice was calm, devoid of the fear that had once ruled her life. Look at yourself. You traveled 1,000 miles to kill a daughter who was already dead to you. You are chasing a ghost. Thaddeus fell to his knees in the dirt, sobbing not out of sadness, but out of the realization that his gavel no longer carried any weight. He was just an old man in a world that had moved past him. They didn't turn him over to the police. They let the winter wind and the long walk back serve as his punishment. Thaddeus Sterling disappeared into history, a man who tried to fight the future and lost. Adeline and Silas walked back toward the lights of the village together. Is it over now? Silas asked, looking up at the North Star. It was over the moment we stepped into that swamp, Silas, Adeline replied, taking his hand. Everything since then has just been life. In the years to come, the story of the judge who went north was told as a cautionary tale, a story about how hate can drive a man mad, but how freedom, once found, can never be taken back. Adeline, Sarah, and Silas lived to see the dawn of a new era, proving that no matter how deep the red clay stains, the spirit can always be washed clean.